The snow fell in thick, heavy flakes on Christmas Eve, blanketing the upscale neighborhood in a pristine white that made everything look like a postcard. Marcus Blackwell pulled his black Mercedes into the driveway of his sprawling colonial home, the engine purring to a stop as he glanced at the dashboard clock, 11:47 p.m. He'd stayed late at the office again, finalizing the quarterly reports that couldn't wait until after the holidays, even though his 8-year-old daughter Emma had been asking all week when he'd be home early enough to help her finish decorating the tree. As he gathered his briefcase and the shopping bags from the passenger seat, last-minute gifts he'd grabbed from the department store before it closed, Marcus noticed movement near the garbage bins at the end of his driveway. At first, he thought it might be a raccoon or stray dog, but as he stepped out of the car, he realized it was a person hunched over, carefully sorting through the contents of his trash. The woman was wrapped in layers of worn clothing, a knitted hat pulled low over her face, and she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Marcus felt his jaw tighten with irritation. He'd worked hard for everything he had. Built his investment firm from the ground up after his wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago, and the last thing he needed was some vagrant making his neighborhood look bad, especially on Christmas Eve. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying the authority he used in boardrooms. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The woman straightened slowly, turning to face him. Even in the dim glow of the streetlight, Marcus could see that she was younger than he'd expected, probably in her 30s, with dark hair escaping from beneath her hat and eyes that held a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. She clutched a small bundle of items against her chest, what looked like some discarded wrapping paper and a few empty containers. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her breath visible in small puffs in the cold air. "I wasn't making a mess. I always put everything back the way I found it." Marcus felt his anger falter slightly at the dignity in her voice, but he pressed on. "That doesn't make it okay. This is private property, and what you're doing is technically theft." The woman's chin lifted a fraction. "Theft of what? Things you threw away? Things you didn't want anymore?" She gestured to the bundle in her arms. "I'm not taking anything that has value to you. Just this wrapping paper that's barely torn, and these containers that might be useful for storing things." "That's not the point," Marcus replied, though even as he said it, he felt the words ring hollow. "You can't just go through people's garbage. There are shelters, social services, proper channels for help." Something flickered across the woman's face, a pain, maybe, or bitter amusement. "Proper channels," she repeated softly. "You think I haven't tried those? You think I woke up one day and decided this was how I wanted to spend Christmas Eve?" The front door of the house burst open, and Emma came running out in her pajamas and bare feet, her blonde hair wild with sleep. "Daddy, you're home." I waited up, and as she stopped short when she saw the woman standing by the trash bins, her eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. "Emma, go back inside," Marcus said quickly, moving to intercept his daughter. "It's freezing out here." But Emma was already looking between her father and the stranger with the keen perception that children sometimes possess. "Are you okay, lady? You look really cold." The woman's expression softened as she looked at the little girl. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You should listen to your daddy and get back inside where it's warm." "Emma, now," Marcus said more firmly, but his daughter had already noticed something that made him stop and really look at the woman for the first time. "Daddy, why does she have pictures?" Marcus followed Emma's gaze to see that among the items the woman held was a small photograph, slightly crumpled but carefully smoothed out. Without thinking, he stepped closer, and the woman instinctively clutched the photo tighter. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Just. It was in the trash, and I thought." But Marcus had caught a glimpse of the image, a family photo, one he remembered discarding just days ago when he'd been going through old albums, trying to declutter before the holidays. It was from Emma's 5th birthday party, taken in their backyard with Sarah still alive and radiant, all of them laughing at something Emma had just said. He'd thrown it away because looking at it hurt too much, because it reminded him of everything he'd lost and couldn't get back. "That's my mommy," Emma said suddenly, her voice filled with wonder. "That's my mommy in the picture." "Why do you have a picture of my mommy?" The woman looked stricken, clearly realizing she'd stumbled into something deeply personal. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I just saw it in the trash and it looked like such a happy family. I thought maybe." She trailed off, then spoke so quietly that Marcus had to strain to hear. "I thought maybe if I kept it, I could remember what it felt like to belong somewhere." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at this stranger who was holding a piece of his discarded past like it was precious, and suddenly all his assumptions began to crumble. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. "Claire," she answered, still clutching the photograph. "Claire Morrison. And I know what you're thinking of, that I'm just some drug addict or criminal who chose this life. But 6 months ago, I was a social worker with an apartment and a car and a life that made sense. Then my mother got sick, really sick, and the medical bills." She stopped, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. The point is, sometimes life takes everything you thought was solid and permanent and sweeps it away in a matter of weeks." Emma tugged on Marcus's coat. "Daddy, she's shivering. Can't she come inside? It's Christmas Eve." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest as he looked at Claire, really looked at her, and saw not a threat or an inconvenience, but a person who had fallen through the cracks of a system he'd always assumed would catch anyone who truly needed help. He thought about all the times he'd passed homeless people on the street and told himself they'd made their choices, that if they really wanted help, it was available. He'd never considered that sometimes help wasn't enough, or came too late, or that the system everyone relied on could fail completely. "When did you last eat?" he heard himself asking. Claire's composure finally cracked slightly. "Yesterday morning. There was a church serving breakfast, but I had to choose between that and getting to the employment office, and I thought." She laughed bitterly. "I thought maybe if I got there early enough, maybe today would be the day someone would give me a chance." Emma was already pulling on Marcus's hand. "Daddy, we have so much food from the party preparations. And it's Christmas Eve. Mommy always said Christmas was about taking care of people." Marcus felt his throat tighten at his daughter's words, remembering Sarah's generous spirit. How she'd always been the one to stop and help, to see the humanity in everyone they encountered. He'd become so focused on protecting what they had left, on building walls around their small family of 2, that he'd forgotten the woman who'd taught him that true security came not from accumulation but from connection. "Claire," he said slowly, "would you like to come inside? Just for tonight. You can have a hot meal, a warm place to sleep, and tomorrow we can figure out. Well, we can figure out what comes next." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me except that I was going through your trash." "You're right," Marcus admitted. "But my daughter knows something I'd forgotten, that every person has a story, and that sometimes the difference between having a home and not having one is smaller than we like to think. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "anyone who would carefully smooth out a discarded family photo because it reminded them of happiness. I think that tells me something important about who you are." Claire looked down at the photograph in her hands, then back at Marcus and Emma. "I don't want charity," she said quietly. "I've never wanted charity." "It's not charity," Emma piped up. "It's Christmas. And Christmas is about family, and sometimes family is just people who decide to take care of each other, even if they just met." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's wisdom, and with grief for Sarah, who would have been so proud of the compassionate person their daughter was becoming. "What do you say, Claire? Will you let us share Christmas Eve with you?" Claire stood there for a long moment, snow collecting on her shoulders, still holding the photograph of a family she'd never met but had carried like a talisman of hope. Finally, she nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Just for tonight," she whispered. "Just for tonight," Marcus agreed, though something told him that this Christmas Eve encounter would change all of their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As they walked toward the house together, Emma chattering excitedly about hot chocolate and Christmas cookies, Claire still carefully holding the rescued photograph, and Marcus wondering how he'd spent 3 years building walls instead of bridges so the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in the possibility of new beginnings.